Hello, snakepliskinist. Thank you so much for bringing up this old video of mine. Not that old, but it's an old topic in a context with, well, it's a year old. And also, thank you for taking the wrong side of it. I appreciate the charity involved with you taking the wrong. I promise to return the favor, and sometime in the future, if just for the hell of it, I'll take the wrong side. In other words, Gary's side. Now, what we have here is a little video site I've created for my own use, and we have lists of people. So in the anti-F list, I happen to know that I've added you. So if I click on that, we can get to your video, to me, and see, oh, you're at the top because you have the most recent video. I could get more of them. I don't mean to show off, but yeah. And there's other people down here that are anaphilists. They're not aphilists. Okay, so Piro, Goodwill Hunting. I could click on that. Now I've taken notes on that, and therefore
I asked for ideas to help me get away from the insanely depressing topic and people that is antinatalism and ephilism, and somebody sent me a video by Piro314 called The Physics of Will. So let's discuss this.
Yeah, let's discuss it. Let's see, maybe I need to make this tiny so this stuff all fits. Since my screen is up there, I could do this. How about that? Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now I can make this. No. Well, maybe it's like this. There we go. How about that? All right. I have notes written in here. So I'm just going to go through, let's see, 2 minutes and 32 seconds of notes that I have taken. Now, the way I did it, other than that first bit, is that when I wanted to make well, other than the second note, I should say, that's coming up, I have, when I wanted to say something, I just hit a button that takes a 10-second clip. So the context is less biased, but it might be a little bit jarring. But this first one I did adjust to be a particular length. So I didn't change the comment because I didn't evidently save it, but let's go.
Is that I want to study it with physics, right? I want to look at what the physics of it is, and unlike what people like in Menhem say, we don't have enough physics to explain the subjective experience.
Probably a mistake to try to understand will in terms of physics. I alluded to this in my derived energy video that I just...
Okay, so you're taking a... Well, I'll just make a note here first. Probably not a good idea to use physics to understand will. Okay. Well, there's a lot of meaning, potential meaning to the word, to the phrase, understanding the will, right? There's how to use your will, but there's also how does it come out of the natural universe. For the latter, it's pretty obvious to me that you would use physics, and the fact that we have no clue is just a reason to keep looking for the first clue. And the context of this video that you're now replying to has to do with me looking to theories that happen to use quantum mechanics, specifically the OR theory by Hameroff and oh, who's the other dude? He's the one with the Nobel Prize at OR. It's Roger Penrose, yeah, that worked with Stephen Hawking. Okay, I'm just going to play these. I don't really remember now. The comment of this one says that...
gain cognitive perspective.
Well, see, physics, it's the wrong tool for this particular range.
Oh, you were saying physics is the wrong tool, and and then you went into as if mechanics, for example, mechanics don't need to know exactly what the physics of the car is. And I say that mechanics could benefit from an understanding of thermodynamics and, some of the mind-bending stuff that was mind-bending still in the 17th, 18th century. We're not all mechanics. I mean, it's like, well, mechanics don't need this. Okay, well, mechanics don't have to learn this. But if we're trying to ask how does the subjective phenomena arise when there is no soul, when there is no God to just breathe it in there, how does it arise? A mechanic might not need to know how to do that, but that doesn't mean we don't.
So I ask for ideas to help reality. It's not really reality itself, and however magical it may feel to you, that's basically what it is. It's shaped by our biology.
So anyway, I know it's a model, right? I've discussed this before, that our subjective experience is like being on a holodeck, Star Trek, which I didn't really watch Star Trek The Next Generation, but I've seen enough to know the holodeck, and I think that that's an accessible metaphor. That our mind creates, and depending how sane you are, the more sane you are, the more you're definitely trying to do this in such a way that the model matches the information that you're getting from your sense perceptions, right? So you're like a blind robot, a blind computer recreating, building an image of its surroundings using cameras and other sensors. Okay, so I understand that well.
Understandable why we would believe that we have free will, because such a belief and the actions that stem from it are very pro-survival.
Okay, now let me continue that a little
Very
bit.
pro-survival. An organism such as ourselves who just believes that all actions are equally futile would not survive. It just wouldn't.
Okay, now I don't think that makes sense. How can the patterns of will be pro-survival if our survival is just like any chemical reaction? It just runs till it runs out, right? A river doesn't need to think. It doesn't need to have an illusion that it's going to run to the bottom of the. Picking this pen up. A river doesn't need the illusion that it's running to the bottom of the canyon on purpose. If we're just a chemical reaction spelling itself to its inevitable end, why would we need to pretend to have a choice in the matter? Right? That doesn't mean we have a choice. It's a question. Why? And it can't be because it helps survival, because nothing can help survival. Everything is predetermined. Survival is predetermined. What you know or don't know won't change what's going to happen.
But, to get back to ranges of conditions, classical theories are very useful within macroscopic ranges of conditions. Now,
of course they're useful, right? And with quantum mechanics and relativity, you could show why they're useful. They're excellent approximations, right? And if you adopt these approximations, furthermore, there's mathematical patterns you can apply. They're not perfect, just like, the idea that one body goes around another in a perfect ellipse. No, it's never perfect. It's a complex system. There's all kinds of nudges, but using that approximation allows us to use these mathematical forms to a good approximation. All right. Now, what you lose because you're approximating is negligible compared to the benefit of being able to do this mathematical analysis. So, the issue is that the limits of classical physics, which include a lot of things that you haven't mentioned yet in this video and don't mention, is that the classical physics cannot explain the subjective experience. And it's for the simple reason that classical physics is predicated on a third-person point of view, on an approximation required by ignoring the first-person point of view. Okay, that's how the approximation is possible. So if you make that commitment in physics, then you're not going to be able to explain the subjective point of view because you're specifically ignoring that part of human experience, the internal experience, which we know is our primary experience, that of this Cartesian theater or whatever you want to call it.
Weak force that any individual atom's contribution to the totality of the system is so minuscule that the quantum mechanical effects can be more or less.
See, this is I saved this note, but it didn't save it. But or I thought I saved it, but it didn't save. In other words, I probably didn't save it. But this is a traditional, common, whatever kind of argument. Well, it's for very small things, and it affects so very little. Well, all you're saying is that if you apply statistics to what we know to be the reality of these small things, you get stuff that is well approximated by Newtonian or classical mechanics or classical thermodynamics. But in classical thermodynamics, you also get the ultraviolet disaster. There's a lot of things you can't explain. You can't explain how radio stations are possible, for that matter. You can't explain really why optical light goes through glass. That's a quantum effect. Magnets, right? What's a real magnet? Is any big macroscopic no, magnetism is something that molecules have. But a macroscopic magnet is just where all those little things are aligned.
At you, and you can use classical physics to determine the exact trajectory the baseball will take.
Okay, but the thing is, you're justifying an approximation. Okay, the issue I brought up in this video is how does the subjective conscious arise from matter? Okay, it's not very much like the question of where do I put my hand to catch a baseball? Right, where do I catch the baseball? And you're calling it macroscopic, but the real point is that where to catch the baseball doesn't involve these subtleties. But we're talking about where does subconsciousness come from, right? If I want to ask how does my hand actually move over there, that's a chemical process of chemical triggering. Chemistry is all explained by quantum mechanics, and that's all that explains. Quantum mechanics is misunderstood in the sense that people don't realize that 98% of what you're talking about or more with quantum mechanics is chemistry. How the hand moves there will involve quantum mechanics. Now, the person doing the catching doesn't have to understand that, but the scientist wanting to know how that such an amazing feat is possible, it's hard for a computer to make those calculations, might want to know a little bit about chemistry and therefore quantum mechanics. So, now the fact that an approximation works doesn't affect the applicability of the model as metaphysical, meaning this is really how reality is. All right, Newton's laws of motion are not complete. We know that because the laws of relativity and general relativity include them as special cases and have more detail that are more accurate. Now, are they also incomplete? One might assume that those are also incomplete. But that doesn't change the fact that one contains the other, and the one, classical mechanics, is at best a special case which never literally happens, but is merely a good approximation. Okay, classical physics, furthermore, does a lot of things that you haven't said yet. It makes a lot of claims, and it brings claims in from classical logic using that as an epistemology. The idea of objects and inherent properties, and we know that's not true. Every object we've ever found is actually a system of energies or smaller particles. It's a system. Classical epistemology doesn't take things as systems. They are things in themselves. They have a logically atomic nature. and they have inherent properties. None of that's true. Velocity in classical mechanics, velocity should be a property of a thing. Really, we know it's a property of a relationship at best. Two things have a velocity between them. Okay, that breaks a lot of classical epistemology. It doesn't have to. It is taken into account in classical physics, which is a funny thing. Galileo took this into account, but the epistemology could still not handle it, and Einstein, using the logic of Galilean relativity, figured out special and general relativity, and then it all fell apart. Now, that seems odd that it was a conflicted system. Classical mechanics, it turns out, is not coherent, so we find out it's a conflicted system. Nobody has shown an incoherence within quantum mechanics or within relativity, and yet they have an incoherence between each other. They explain different phenomena. They don't seem to interrelate in a direct way, at least. Of course, scientifically, people generally take quantum mechanics as the explanation, the incorporation of relativity as the problem, partially because relativity is still more classical than quantum mechanics.
And momentum at any given point along the continuum. However, for macroscopic objects, the indeterminacy, which...
Okay, my comment here was just that I hate this whole thing about macroscopic objects. You know, we have glass, it's a macroscopic object. You have a campfire, that's a macroscopic object. It burns blue and green and orange. That has to do with quantum mechanics. That's what explains the spectrum of burning chemicals. I think there's a lot of macroscopic objects that show the effects of microscopic objects if the microscopic objects are in maybe what you might call a special state. Microscopically little iron atoms, I think, right, are magnetic, and if you put them all together, they'll act magnetic on a so-called macroscopic level if their magnetism's pointed in the same way. If silicon crystals are formed and you have a crystal or quasi-crystal, optical light will shoot right through it, and it's all explained by quantum mechanics and only by quantum mechanics. Classical mechanics has no explanation for those things, and that's where quantum mechanics came from, though specifically it originally came from trying to model the atom.
Margin of error for any kind of measuring equipment that we might bring to bear on the matter, we can use the classical theory to describe its motion.
You know what? I can use the Greek the Greek myth theory of why there's a storm. You know, that Poseidon is angry, and he's usually angry for about 2 hours this time of year, and be right. So are you saying there's a nested reality to that? That's also as true? No. The reason fallacious approximations like that work can be understood. It's like, oh, well, because you can use a personality model to model the physical effects of the ocean. You can also use a thermodynamic model, and you can get more and more accurate, and the most accurate we have is the modern physics of relativity, and especially quantum mechanics, and that's just the way that it is.
That arises.
And not to belabor the point, but it doesn't really need to. Here's another way to look at it. My laptop here.
Okay, so this is the weirdness of your clips, is that I just hit when I decided to respond. But the point here is you're saying classical physics doesn't need to explain the subjective experience, and then you talk about a laptop, and you don't need to know how the computer works in order to use that and understand what a word processor is. Well, first of all, who needs? You say it doesn't need to. Well, it doesn't matter if classical physics needs to. It can't. Whether it needs to or not, it can't. And I hypothesize that some scientific system can explain it, period. And I'm interested in what that might be. And I'm a programmer. To me, I think, well, here, look, I made this to your next comment.
But in order to understand the experience of the program, you don't need to understand that, and it's kind of irrelevant.
So what I was going to say is I write programs. I'm a software engineer. And the experience that mere users have of a program, to me, is incomplete. to me, I see the part you're missing. When you use a program, whether you didn't write it, but when I use a program, sometimes it's one I've written, sometimes it's one I'm just using. In my experience, I think is more complete. So you could say you don't need that for your approximation of the universe, but it's almost as if you're arguing against using high-resolution graphics. I don't need high-resolution pictures, I only need a couple pixels in order to catch the baseball. And it's like, well, yeah, but to understand the real shape of the baseball versus a Rubik's Cube, maybe you need thousands of pixels instead of 5. I see that as the real disagreement. And here's your last bit, and I'll make a comment.
Get our way, it makes us happy, because getting our way makes us more likely to survive. Well, this has been a fun little chat. Have a nice day.
I don't see how getting our way necessarily makes it more likely to survive, because people don't always make the best decisions on their desires playing out for survival. Now, there's an evolutionary argument and from evolutionary biology to say that people that aren't going along that route will die off, and so that happens. But none of this really answers the point of my video that I was talking about, which is this so-called hard problem of consciousness. Why do you have a first-person view of self? I can understand how a machine, a computer, a Turing machine, or a machine even of gears and levers and weights, might behave like a mammal or a human or some other animal or a plant. Okay, I could see how it might behave that way. I don't see why on the inside it's going, I'm a plant. I don't see that. And if you're saying, well, it's just inevitable consequences, then it's no different from a bunch of gunpowder that's been ignited and it burns out to the end. It's no different from a river that's flowing downstream and it takes months before it enters the river to gets to the ocean. Is it surviving? Does it need to have a subjective idea that I'm deciding where to go in order to go downhill? No, it just goes downhill. The gunpowder just burns along until the gunpowder's all consumed. There's without will being something real, a real specifier in the language, meaning something. There is no way to say why a chemical reaction would need to have the desire to survive, because you're saying that there's nothing you can do. You can't make decisions, but somehow believing that you're making decisions will help you survive longer. That doesn't make sense. You're going to survive exactly how long you're meant to as a random occurrence, as a chain reaction, semi-random, right? The conditions are random, but once the chain reaction goes, it unfolds based on, is this powder next to that powder? Is this, downhill from that point where the water was before? There's no way to invent a notion of being able to do something that helps your survival unless you think you have some sort of an option. If you're just flowing downhill, then you're just flowing downhill. All right, thank you very much.